Hello, my name is Denise Hancock, and this presentation was prepared for the New Orleans Astrology Meetup Group on November 20th of 2021. We spent some time today talking about the transit of Venus through Capricorn, and I forgot to hit record. So I'm going to recap the presentation for anyone who missed it live and wants to catch up. Again, my name is Denise Hancock, and I do have a professional astrology consulting business at astrologywithdenise.com. In addition, I am the organizer and host of the New Orleans Astrology Meetup Group. We meet once a month to sometimes have presentations, to share, to have discussions, and most of the meetings are online, and anyone of any level of interest is welcome to join. As you may know, Venus just entered Capricorn a few weeks ago, and so I thought this was a prime time to talk today about the transit and what you might expect from it, both on a global societal basis as well as in your own lives. We're going to start off by just talking a little bit about the archetypes themselves, and then we will dive into what you might expect. So the planet Venus entered the sign of Capricorn on November the 5th. So it's just over 2 weeks ago today. Now, normally Venus only stays in a sign for about a month, but because she's going to have an apparent retrograde motion, she will actually be visible to us in the sign of Capricorn for 4 months. So that's a lot of Venus in Capricorn. Venus turns retrograde on December the 18th at about 26 degrees and 28 minutes of Capricorn. She'll go backwards all the way to 11 degrees of Capricorn, at which point time she'll turn around and go direct again and find her way on out of the sign of Capricorn and into Aquarius on March 6th. So it's quite a long time for Venus in Capricorn. So let's just start off by talking a little bit about Venus as a planet and as an archetype in both the natal chart and the transits in the sky. Venus has historically been associated with several mythical goddesses across different cultures and times, whereas sometimes a goddess is associated as a crone, an old wise woman, sometimes as a mother. The particular archetype of Venus is more that of someone who is a young woman in her sexual prime. She's been associated with the concepts of beauty and attractiveness, of sexual love and desire, and with fertility. I'm a student of traditional astrology, and we know Venus as the planet who's called the lesser benefic. Jupiter is the planet who is the greater benefic. Both Jupiter and Venus have a nature that is generally good and kind and easy. It's the kind of things that humans like, right? So things we desire, things that are beautiful, things that are nourishing and warm, social connections. Those are all concepts that are affiliated with Venus. Also, from the traditional astrological perspective, we consider Venus to be a nocturnal or feminine sign. So some of the planets are associated with more masculine, assertive energies. Venus is considered more of a feminine or nocturnal energy. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not important or it doesn't get things done, but it tends to be more receptive instead of more assertive. Venus is also considered to be hot, moderately hot, and moist. When you think about the elements of cold and dry and hot and wet, being moderately hot and moist is kind of like being in a greenhouse, right? It's a very nurturing place. That's the basis of fertility. The womb is warm and moist. The ground is warm and moist. So it's associated with that notion of fertility, of growth, and of nourishment. I have Venus's sign over here, the typical symbol of Venus, if that's something you're not familiar with, in the corner. It's essentially a circle on top of a cross. I'm going to read just a short excerpt to you from Richard Tarnas's 2006 book, cosmos and psyche, intimations of a new worldview. This is what Richard Tarnas has to say about Venus. She represents the principle of desire, love, beauty, and value, the impulse and capacity to attract or be attracted, to love and be loved, to seek and create beauty and harmony, to engage in social and romantic relations, sensuous pleasures, artistic and aesthetic experience, the principle of Eros and the beautiful, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. And one of the flowers that's classically associated with Venus is the carnation. So you see a lovely carnation here, along with these beautiful words describing the essence of Venus from Cosmos and Psyche. But Venus has a dark side too. When Venus appears in a horoscope chart, traditional astrology assigns planets greater or lesser dignity, or even debility or weakness based upon which sign they're in. So according to traditional astrology, Venus had two homes in the sky, Libra being the day home, and the sign of Taurus being the night home. Those are the places which Venus is the ruler of, that she controls, they're her domain. The sign of Pisces is the home of Jupiter, and it is a place where Venus is exalted, like an honored guest. So when Venus is in Libra, Taurus, or Pisces, she's said to be dignified. And Venus in these signs is really symbolic of pleasure and ease and comfort, of beauty, attractiveness, of loving relationships, comfortable and warm connections. Venus is also very playful here, right? Which is affiliated with like her role as both a muse and a creator, art, music, poetry, language. These are all very Venusian things. So Venus has creative expression best when she's dignified. When Venus is in other parts of the chart that are opposing her dignified areas, these would be the signs of Mars, which are Aries, the day home of Mars, Scorpio, the night home of Mars, and Virgo, which is one of Mercury's homes. In these signs, Venus is said to be debilitated. She doesn't have the resources available to her that she would in her own home or where she's an honored guest. And so she kind of has to work extra hard and maybe doesn't work as well as she could. So sometimes in these signs, Venus is considered to be debilitated, and that can lead to things like extremes. So instead of just ease, perhaps laziness or lethargy. The notion of vanity, of wanting excessive amount of attractiveness and always comparing oneself to others, spending too much money, being extra indulgent, extravagance, being greedy. A debilitated Venus can also be associated with things like a lack of boundaries, like people who are codependent, people who are always ceding to the will of other people. Venus can also be associated with violent passions, things like jealousy, envy, infidelity, promiscuity. And I would point out that even in the legends of Venus, the ancient myths, Venus was married, but she was not faithful to her husband. She engaged in many affairs. And in fact, her association with Mars was an extramarital affair. She also was known to sometimes cause fights. She wanted to be the most beautiful. And if she was not named the most beautiful, then she would want to start a fight so that nobody could enjoy the honor and the privilege that came with that. As my teacher, Sam Reynolds, says, Venus can also be a little bit of a shit starter. So it's good to know that while Venus is associated with all these wonderful, beautiful, attractive things, she can also cause some trouble, both in your chart and in the world at large. So Venus is moving into a sign of Capricorn. And Capricorn is known as one of Saturn's homes, Saturn being the planet we know as the greater malefic, who often gives us the hard lessons of life, more austerity, coldness, delays, restrictions, boundaries. Saturn is sometimes the planet that says, no, if you want that, you're going to have to work harder. Come back and try again. Capricorn is a cardinal sign, it's cardinal earth. What I mean by that, actually, we can think about as quite literally. When the sun moves into Capricorn in the northern hemisphere on the winter solstice, it is the starting, the initiation, the cardinal energy that starts winter here. It is technically cold and dry. You know, your skin dries out. It's very cold outside. However, Capricorn is still considered to be a feminine and nocturnal sign. Like I said, it's the night home of Saturn, and it's a more feminine energy than Saturn's day home of Aquarius, more receptive or yin in its nature. When you think about people who have heavy placements in the sign of Capricorn, the overall temperament affiliated with that is what we call melancholic. I like to think of melancholic as being sort of the classic Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh mood. So someone who's melancholic doesn't tend to look on the bright sides. They seem to be like a hard realist who believes that things are a burden, life is hard. If a good thing comes, it probably has strings. Maybe it's going to turn bad later. So the melancholy temperament is like that. It's sort of a little bit of always looking on the dark side, but in terms of a cold realism. Capricorn is also associated with structures. And on a personal basis, it is about our body structures. So it's our skeleton, right? It's our bones and our teeth. It's also our skin because it creates a boundary on our bodies. Capricorn's also associated with the knees. Some key words that I like to use for Capricorn are things that are constructive, material progress, things that are practical, actions that are deliberate and persistent, disciplined, conservative. Capricorn people tend to be emotionally reserved. They're not particularly passionate. You may not ever see them express their feelings. You'll definitely see what they accomplish. They may tell you what they think, but they're unlikely to be very emotionally effusive. Capricorn is symbolized by the sea goat. And the sea goat is a creature from mythology that essentially could come from the ocean up into land and up to the highest mountains, right? So someone who's a Capricorn personality can sort of conquer the world slowly but surely, emerging from the sea, climbing the highest mountain, very diligent, very persistent. So how do these two archetypes go together? You have a beautiful, warm, attractive, creative goddess moving into this cold winter home. Well, one of the ways we can think about that is to consider some natives who have Venus in Capricorn in their personal horoscope and their birth charts from the time they were born. People like this tend to be charming, but yet kind of reserved. Like I said, they're not emotionally effusive. They tend to keep their emotions in check and only show you what they want to show. But yet they're very charming. They're pleasant to engage with. They have the social niceties. A code word I like to think for folks like this is connoisseur. There are people who really want to invest in things of long-term quality. They would rather have one beautiful $4,000 purse than $140 purses, right? They're in it for the long term. They are great people to go thrift store shopping with or to a flea market because they can always spot things that are of great value. They're mostly interested in the material, but I don't necessarily mean that in a bad or negative way. Some people would say Venus and Capricorn people might be gold diggers. Instead, I would see that they're looking for things that are of long-lasting worth. Yes, they might want to obtain wealth and they might enjoy status symbols, but they're also interested in like the physical environment. And that could be a natural or man-made space. So a Venus and Capricorn person would want to have a home and a car that are like well designed and reliable and hold their value over time. They would want to be good stewards of the earth, taking care of the garden and the air, because again, that long lasting quality commitment. They tend to have a tendency for mature and stable and committed relationships and have an aesthetic sense, which is about structure and definition. As I think about Venus and Capricorn in my own life, the word that stands out most to me is it's time to upgrade when Venus is in Capricorn. It's a time of assessing both of myself and the things around me. What are the value? What is it worth? How do I get more out of what I have? And I picked just a couple of actors here to sort of display the traits of Venus and Capricorn. At the top, you see Anthony Hopkins, who was actually born with a stellium in Venus that does, a stellium in Capricorn that includes Venus. And then down in the right is Jennifer Love Hewitt, a younger actress who has not only Venus, but also the moon in Capricorn. In my earlier session today, when we were talking about the prior transit of Venus and Capricorn, one of our participants pointed out that Jennifer Love Hewitt here actually got married during the 2013-2014 transit of Venus and Capricorn, but that is also her natal placement. Both of these are people who are consummate professionals, right? You never see them in the tabloids. There's not a lot of drama around them. They look great, they show up, they do their job, and they get really high regard. And so I think of that as being kind of a model of what Venus and Capricorn can be. When you think about Venus and Capricorn at the society level, going back and looking at different news cycles, what I saw were frequent headlines that were about women or the feminine taking power, women in leadership roles, sometimes for the first time and in an area where maybe it was traditionally a masculine authoritative role. There was a lot of headlines around negotiations or conflicts that had to do with relationships. And that could be at the personal level, right, of things like marriages, divorces, and romances, but it also was at the more cultural level, right, like states versus states, nations versus nations, ideologies versus ideologies, religions versus religions. These sorts of power struggles that come as different groups of people try to either overpower or relate with each other in some way. It also can mean some serious creativity or play, right? Things like architecture, design, as well as things like peacemaking and harmony. I do want to take just a second, though. Again, we talked about the dark side of Venus, and clearly relationship conflicts can be that. Historically, Venus was considered to have different natures when she was a morning star or an evening star. Right now, on November 20th, when I'm doing this presentation, I was just out walking the dog. And every evening when I've been walking the dog, I've seen Venus as this glorious, sparkling diamond in the sky. But soon, as she approaches the sun, she will become invisible to the naked eye because she's too close to the sun to be seen. And then as she retrogrades, she will emerge as a morning star. So classically, it was thought that when Venus is an evening star, that is really when you get the beautiful, loving goddess Venus, right? She is someone who wants to romance and be romanced and have leisure. When Venus is in retrograde and she's the morning star, she's said to be more like Mars, much more warlike and aggressive, much more likely to start trouble. So right now we're in that evening star phase, but as Venus turns retrograde, we'll get the morning star phase before then she turns direct again and we get back to her evening star self. This is actually a photo of Venus, and she's sort of a copper color, which is the metal that's most associated with her. So the last time Venus had an extended stay in Capricorn, a 4-month stay to be exact, was 8 years ago, almost to the dot. November 2013, she went into Capricorn, and she was there until early March of 2014. And I pulled just one random chart from those days to kind of give you a sense of what else was happening in the sky when Venus was in the middle of her Capricorn journey, at least by degree. So every sign in the sky has 30 degrees, which it covers. And what you see here on this visual is the sign of Venus here in green at about halfway through the sign of Capricorn. And she is conjunct 5 degrees away from the planet Pluto. Right now, Pluto is in Capricorn on November 20th, 2021. And Pluto was also in an earlier degree of Capricorn during this 8 years ago Venus cycle. So that is one of the things that is repeating, this influence of Venus aligned with Capricorn. But back in 2013, I think the skies were a little bit harsher to Venus during that transit. I've circled a couple of other planetary positions here that I wanted to take note of. So we have Venus holding hands, if you will, with Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. And then in a square relationship, which represents conflicts and tensions, is the planet Uranus in the sign of Aries. Then making a T-square in the sky, so a square and also an opposition, is Jupiter, who was exalted in Cancer. And I told you earlier that Jupiter is known as the greater benefic and normally brings great things and opportunities. But another role that Jupiter can serve is simply to make things bigger, to blow things up, to expand things. And so 8 years ago, when Venus did this same sort of 4-month trek through Capricorn, she was involved in a kind of a tense relationship with Pluto opposing the planet of Jupiter, and both of them squaring Uranus. She also had some gentler relationships, but that was the main signature of the transit. And there were, in fact, some harsh headlines from that time period. I looked around the world, and here's some of the things that just jumped out at me as representing this era of Venus and Capricorn. In early December of 2013, Nelson Mandela, of course, a famous civil rights leader in South Africa, died in his 90s. There was a lot in the news around same-sex relationships. In December of 2013, the Supreme Court of India banned gay sex, making it illegal. 2 female members of the punk rock band known as Pussy Riot had been jailed in Russia because of their protest work. And in December of 2013, they were freed from a Russian jail. There were a lot of violent protests around the world, but particular headlines around protests in the Ukraine and Venezuela. 2 countries which had been really at odds with each other for a long time and had not held a meeting in 65 years came to the table. They did not create peace, but they at least began a civil conversation, and that was Taiwan and China. In the United States, we had the very first woman who was confirmed as chairman of the US Federal Reserve, which is, of course, our national banking system, a traditionally very structured, male, authoritative type of institution. So here we have a woman ascending to power of a traditionally male, very Capricorn institution. You may remember that later in 2014, the Sochi Winter Olympics were in Russia. And during this time period, there were lots of threats about bombs and violence that were made in regard to the upcoming Olympics. Interestingly, there were major budget cuts by the US government, shrinking the Army's budget to the smallest it had been since before World War II. So that was sort of a reduction in the forces of conflict. And like I said, there was a lot of headlines around same-sex marriage. Some of the states, I think it was the 14th, 15th, and 16th states in the United States, adopted it and made same-sex marriage legal. Yet in other places, there were headlines about how lawmakers were trying to put bans in place to restrict it so that it would not be honored in those states. So lots of controversy around civil rights and sexual and civil matters. So taking you back to today, like I said, Venus entered Capricorn on November 5th, so 2 weeks ago. On December 18th, she's going to be retrograde, almost exactly conjoining, holding hands with Pluto. She's going to go backwards in the sky, according to our vision, back to 11 degrees Capricorn, before she then turns around and goes into Aquarius on March 6th. Now, you've probably heard a lot about Mercury retrogrades. And usually when Mercury retrogrades, people will tell you it's a time to do the words that begin with RE. It's time to review, reflect, revise, revisit, recreate. And you can think of that in similar terms for Venus, but instead of being so much about communication and travel and mental activity, it's more about values and worth and possessions and material things and relationships and peace and relationship dynamics. So some of the things that happen when Venus turns retrograde is sometimes an old lover comes back. So you revisit an old romance. Or maybe you review your current romance and you decide, hey, this isn't stacking up for me anymore. It's not what I value, and I don't feel worthy in this. Sometimes people literally will upgrade their appearance, they'll upgrade their work, they'll upgrade other things that have to do with their identity. But those are some same kinds of concepts for a Mercury retrograde that you can think about for a Venus retrograde. So, where's Venus at today? Well, at 4 o'clock today, when we held our meetup, I just wanted to give a quick glimpse of the sky so everyone could see where Venus is and what she was doing, what other aspects she was making. So here in today's chart from 4 o'clock, we had Venus in Capricorn at 13 degrees and 30 minutes of orb, and in the 9th house of astrology. So I thought it was perfectly appropriate we were talking about her today. When Venus is in Capricorn, she's not really has great essential dignity or debility, but she kind of has just a little bit of dignity. She's what's known as the triplicity ruler by day in the sign of Capricorn, which means she has some resources and authority of her own. You'll take note in this chart that Pluto is in Capricorn. Like I said, just like 2013, 2014, Venus and Pluto are going to be dancing together. Venus is also what's known as out of bounds by declination. And the easiest way I know how to explain this, it has to do with how far away she is in her orbit. She's essentially escaped the bounds of the orbit of the sun and is really out on her own, which kind of gives you a little bit of extra Venus power. She's not reporting to anyone. She's kind of free to pursue her own agenda. And she was ruling at 4 o'clock, the ascendant or the rising sign of the chart. Not only is she approaching Pluto in the sign of Capricorn, but she had 2 other really important relationships that I wanted to take note of, highlighted by the yellow lines. One of those is that she has just made a trine, which is a supportive aspect with the planet Uranus yesterday. Uranus is actually known as being things that are abrupt and sudden, surprises and disruptions. So I don't know if any of you noticed something like that yesterday. We also had an eclipse, right? So it was hard not to. And Venus actually was the ruler of that eclipse, which happened on the Taurus and Scorpio axis. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the eclipses this season, but Venus is definitely involved. So Venus and Uranus were essentially supporting each other's agendas. Venus also has a supportive, helpful, friendly relationship now that she's left Uranus. She is approaching, essentially waving hello at Mars in Scorpio, where Mars is very strong right now. Again, this is a friendly relationship. And if you actually follow the charts, what you'll see is that Mars is trying to approach Venus and will get closer and closer until they meet early next year. So he's going to be part of the story of Venus in Capricorn. Venus also happens to be parallel, which is kind of like a conjunction with the fixed star called Antares. Antares is of the nature of Mars and Venus. It's a star that is in the heart of the scorpion in the sky. And so I think that perhaps adds just a little bit of assertion kind of more oomph and more power to Venus, who, like I said, is already out of bounds and getting some little boost from Uranus and Mars. So we kind of have, in the words of my friend Dan Beck, we have a wild Venus out here right now. So what else is going on in Capricorn for the next 4 months? Actually, a lot. And this was also true in the period of November 2013 to March 2014. There's a wonderful astrology website I like to use called Archetypal Explorer, archetypalexplorer.com. And one of the things that will let you do is look at how the planets are transiting both in the world and in your own birth chart. So this particular graphic is from Archetypal Explorer. And what I did was I put the inner planets, so Mercury, Venus, and Mars, transits for the next 3 months using a 5-degree orb, so a pretty close orb. So as we enter the month of December, we're not quite there yet. This is essentially where Venus goes from being 5 degrees away from Pluto to 4 degrees, 3 degrees, 2 degree, 1 degree, and then 0 degrees. Venus will pass Pluto, start to move on, and then she will hit this retrograde point where she spins around and goes back towards Pluto and bumps into him again for the second time. As she starts moving away with Pluto, Mercury will be in Capricorn, and Mercury will join Venus as Venus is separating from Pluto. Now, Mercury tends to take on the character and the mood of whoever he's hanging out with. So this will be a very Venus and Capricorn type Mercury as she comes away from Pluto and is retrograde. So again, more of that morning star warlike Venus energy. The sun will, of course, also be in Capricorn because it moves into Capricorn in late December with the winter solstice. And so the Venus will then, after she leaves Mercury, run into the sun, whereas she's essentially burnt and purified. This is a cycle of rebirth for Venus, where she goes from being old in her cycle to sort of re-energized and new. So once she comes out of that conjunction with the sun, she's going to be on her own for a little bit while the sun and Mercury do their own things. And then over here, the 1st of February, you can see that Venus and Mars finally get close to meeting. So Mars is now in Capricorn, and they will become perfectly conjunct in mid-February, and they're going to stay very, very close to each other for the rest of February, and will literally be right next to each other as they both exit the sign of Capricorn and move into Aquarius on March 6th, which I think will be very important. It's hard to tell from this visual, but after these first 2 conjunctions with Pluto, Venus is actually going to have a third one. While Venus and Mars are together, they will both conjoin Pluto in early March, so number 3. So really interesting there that there's so much activity and that Venus and Mars are going to join forces in the month of March moving forward. Venus is also going to be flirting with some of the outer planets during this time. Not only is she joining forces with inner planets, but she's also saying hello and getting some strength and some energy from the big guys. So we already said that she trined Uranus yesterday. She's going to get very close to Uranus trine again, but not quite make it before she turns around. When Venus gets close to Uranus, again, you can have a desire for novelty, sudden changes, sudden urges. So you may still see some more of that influence in late January as she gets close. At the end of this month, Venus is going to sextile Neptune, and she will do that 2 more times. As she's retrograde, it'll happen again on January 5th. And then as she's direct again, it'll happen on February 24th. Venus and Neptune are sometimes said to be very similar in nature by modern astrologers, with Neptune being a much more sort of blown out of proportion, the higher octave, if you will, of Venus. So Venus and Neptune having this like stimulating sextile relationship can really arouse your creative and your romantic imagination. If you are an artist in any form, these are great times to work, to write, to paint, to draw, to dream. Venus sextile Neptune can be a time when you have increased empathy and compassion for other people. You're more into like harmony and wanting to merge and wanting to forgive. So great times for repairing interpersonal dynamics. The dark side of Venus and Neptune is that they can lead each other astray a little bit. It can really be a time when you think better of people than you ought to. So maybe you're a little delusional. You can be subject to deception where you trust people maybe you shouldn't. I have been guilty of sometimes starting relationships when there were heavy Neptune transits. And usually that person seems really great. And then the more you get to know them, you realize, hey, this really wasn't the right thing for me. It can also be very indulgent. Venus sextile Neptune can make you perhaps spend a lot of money that you don't have, or be very lazy and not do things. So I encourage you to do creative work if you can, but also to put some like checks and boundaries on yourself, right? Like, so make some notes to yourself about, hey, you know, not a great time to fall in love with somebody without like making myself wait. You don't want to elope when there's a Venus sextile Neptune, but it can be a really fun creative period. Now, Venus is going to join Pluto 3 times as well, direct, retrograde, and direct. The first time will be December 11th, then on Christmas Day, and then again on March 3rd. When Venus joins Pluto, it sort of just intensifies things and can also bring up some sort of more like dark and unusual desires and attractions. Things can seem very compelling, very powerful. You can be very obsessive about things. Or you can also sort of unearth something that you never noticed before. Pluto has strong themes of death, rebirth, transformation, going into the underworld or the deep. And so, you know, these again are times when you may feel overly emotional. And so you may want to flag those dates and the dates for 3 or 4 days around them on the calendar. It's times to really check yourself and know that this transit may be impacting you now, but it will pass. I am happy to again point out that these transits do look much friendlier, nicer, more creative and supportive than the transits we saw in 2013, 2014. So you might think back upon your life in 2013 from November to March of 2014 and think about how the Venus transit impacted you, but with a little differences because we're in a different, you know, she has different aspects this time, even though she's still in Capricorn with Pluto. One chart that I did want to share today, because I just thought it was fascinating, is again that Christmas Day, December 25th conjunction of Venus with Capricorn. There's another really important conjunction taking place in the sky on the day before. As you may know, if you're familiar with astrology, one of the themes of 2021 that's going to be carrying through into next year is the planet Saturn being in a square with Uranus. So you see Saturn here at 11 degrees Aquarius and Uranus at 11 degrees Taurus. They are going to make their 3rd exact square of the year on December 24th. So that will still be very much in effect when Venus joins Pluto on December 25th. There's also going to be 2 other planets, right, or bodies. The sun will be in Capricorn and Mercury will be in Capricorn at the same time. So that's a really heavy Saturn Capricorn influence. When you add it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 of the planets are reporting to Saturn. Jupiter reports to Jupiter, which also reports to Saturn. The moon is going to report to Mercury, which also reports to Saturn. So other than, well, really the whole sky is reporting to Saturn. So as I thought about this, I thought, you know what? I'm not going to go to my hometown and hang out with my family this year for Christmas. It looks like a time to me when there might be lots of old relationship dynamics that are unearthed. And while I'm having a clash of authority and boundaries and tradition, versus disruption and revolution. It's like I decided I'm going to just wait a few days and I will celebrate the holidays a few days after these transits pass. And where the moon is in the sky, the moon actually will be that day supporting all those Capricorn planets. And maybe I'm being a little overly negative. Maybe it'll be lovely, but I just decided for myself, this day might be a little bit more interesting than I want to spend in a place where sometimes things can be a little tense anyway. So I'm going to enjoy a nice, peaceful day at home and, do with that as you will. But I thought it was worth noting. So the question most people want to know is, what does Venus's 4-month trip through Capricorn mean for you? And so I did some digging and pulled out one of my favorite books, Rob Hand's Planets in Transit, to just kind of give you by rising sign, if you consider whole sign houses and your rising sign, what you might look for as you think about the next 3.5 months as Venus goes through your house. Now, obviously, this can be different depending upon what your natal Venus position was. So where was Venus in your birth chart and what kind of condition was she in? What was she aspecting? And of course, what other planets are impacting you? So this won't be a end all be all, but we'll just give you some things to look out for. So I'm going to start with if your rising sign was Aries. And if your rising sign was Aries, then Venus would be in your 10th house and Pluto as well. So you've probably been going through a lot of transitions over the last decade. In this, what Venus would bring to you is a time when you're more attractive and maybe have more harmony and more relatability with people who are in authority or the general public. So it's a great time also to get involved in work that has to do with Venus. Any kind of artistic work or designing or organizing, or you may even find that you're attracted to people who are older and more authoritarian types. If your rising sign was in Pisces, then this Venus transit is going to happen to you in the 11th house. It's a really great time to enjoy groups and associations. You're going to want to harmonize, and you're also going to want to help people, whether it be colleagues or associates in your sphere. It may also be a time when you want to revisit your own hopes and wishes and think about what the future should look like for you and what are you really worth. If your rising sign was Aquarius, then Venus would be here in the 12th house. And sometimes the 12th house is kind of almost like a selflessness. It can be almost like a martyr type energy when Venus is there, and that you're so willing to relate to others that you give more than you actually take back. It can also be a time of secret dalliances, so be warned about that. Any secret might always come out. And it also can be a time when unresolved or hidden issues come to the surface. And I see a real possibility for that since Venus is conjoining Pluto. So I wouldn't be surprised to find some dark skeletons in the closet if you are an Aquarius rising with Capricorn and Venus in your 12th house. If you are a Capricorn rising, then Venus is going to be through your 1st house. And this actually is my own position. Here, you might see yourself acting more as a peacemaker, seeking harmony. It also just gives you a really nice ability to draw people to you in all capacities of life. It can also help you to really think about your core identity and your appearance and make necessary changes so that you align yourself with what you want your identity to be. If you are a Sagittarius rising, then Venus will transit through your 2nd house. And this can mean a great boost for your income, either by attracting money-making opportunities to you, making good investments. If you're going to be purchasing things, finding things that are either a bargain or that are going to be a long-term profit for you, do be cautious when Venus hits those Neptune transits of overspending or overindulging. But overall, it can be a really positive transit for your income and your resources. If you are a Scorpio rising, then this Venus transit is going to be in your 3rd house. And that should just really make everyday interactions a little bit more pleasant. You probably are going to run into a lot of people who have good holiday spirits, who want to help you. You may feel the need to create beauty in your neighborhood and in your home, or even have good relationships with your siblings or your cousins, people that are like family to you. If you are a Libra rising, then this transit's going to happen in your 4th house. And this can be a great time for entertaining at home, inviting people to your home, decorating your home. It can also help you improve your relationships with your parents. You may be planning for some home improvements in the new year. Do be cautious of overeating or over drinking. According to Rob Hand, when Venus is transiting here through your 4th house, if you indulge too much, that can lead to digestive issues. So be cautious there. If you are a Virgo rising, then it's going to happen in your 5th house, which is the house of children and of pleasure and recreation, a really lovely place for Venus to be. So you may have an increase in recreational things, entertaining things you're doing, fun. It also can be love affairs, creativity, new creative processes, new creative structures, or it also could impact your relationships with your children or something good that happens to your children. If you're a Leo rising, then Venus is going to transit through your 6th house. This is the place where Venus is sort of least happy, but in the sign of Capricorn, she can be very productive. And so if Venus is transiting through your 6th house, it's a good time to confront difficulties. So if there's somebody you have a bad relationship with, particularly at work, but also could be home, it's a good time to come to the table and talk about it. It's going to be easier to resolve those issues. It's also good for health matters to maybe revise what you're doing or revise your treatment plan or seek out a new healthcare provider. It can be a time when you make changes in the realm of pets, adopting a new pet or something changes in regarding to your pet situation. So it can be useful. If you're Cancer rising, then Venus is going to oppose your ascendant in the 7th house, in the sign of Capricorn. Venus in your 7th house is the best transit for all kinds of relationships. Work, pleasure, any type of one-to-one relationship should go smoother for you. Although it also can be a time when you decide that a relationship isn't working for you and you're able to review it, let it go, and find something new. So that can happen too, but it will ultimately be a good move. If your rising sign is Gemini, then Venus is going to pass through your 8th house. Here, modern astrology says it can stimulate sexual interactions and intensity. That might be the case for you. The 8th house has to do with like the resources of other people in your life, right? And so it could be about joint resources or power struggles over resources or negotiating resources. I really love this transit as a great time to apply for money. So if you're thinking about applying for a grant, applying for a mortgage, any kind of financing or financial opportunity, Venus can really help you to get the financial help you need here, or even a gift from someone else. If you have a Taurus rising, then Venus is going to be traveling through your 9th house. And here you may well find yourself attracted to different and strange things. You may decide that you need to take a long-term trip. Long distance travel is very favored and should go smoothly. It expands kind of your overall sense of beauty and awe. And so those are wonderful things. If you are a person who is religious and participates in like organized religion, can also be a great time for getting involved in the rituals and the ceremonies and really sort of upgrading your religious commitments. It can also be good for education and studies. If you are a Aries rising, we already did. So I guess that's it. We made it through the zodiac. So that's kind of a highlight of what you might look for, but do keep in mind it's highly variable. If you really want to take a good look at it, I'd recommend that you consult an astrologer who can talk to you about your own birth chart, as well as all the other transits and progressions and things that are going on in your life to see what the impacts of this long stay of Venus in Capricorn might do for you. I'd be happy to do that for you, but I know there's plenty of other wonderful astrologers that you can find as well. So finally, I wanted to finish up today with a bonus election. So the two forms of astrology, which I really love to do, are what's called horary and electional astrology. Electional astrology is like choosing the best date and time to take an action. And so as I was scrolling through charts, I came upon this moment on Valentine's Day. If you are single and you are having a crush on someone that you haven't yet approached, I think this is a prime opportunity. So it takes place at 9 a.m., like I said, on Valentine's Day, February 14th. And what's going on in this chart is essentially it's the hour of Jupiter, and you have a very strong Jupiter. He's in his home of Pisces, and he is sextiling the midheaven, right, the top of the sky at this moment at 9 a.m. What's happening here at the top of the sky is Mars is finally catching Venus. So Mars would represent you, because Aries, one of the homes of Mars, is rising on the eastern horizon. And Venus represents the other person, right? The western horizon. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. He's very strong there, willing to go after he wants. So it's a great time when at this moment you would have a lot of confidence, a lot of charisma, and Venus is dignified, and Mars and Venus are gonna connect. So I call this the act on your crush moment. In addition, the moon just entered the sign of Leo in the house of romance, of pleasure, of sex. So I say, make your move on Valentine's Day at 9 a.m. and let me know how it goes. Thank you for watching this presentation. If you'd like to get in touch with me, like I said, I'm the organizer of the New Orleans Astrology Meetup that you can find at meetup.com. I do have a consulting business called Astrology with Denise. My website is astrologywithdenise.com. And I would be happy to talk with you, to connect you with the meetup group, or to do a consultation for you if that's something you're interested in. Thanks, and see you next month.